Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leidinger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. Sometimes these people think that they're just ordinary. But C.S. Lewis reminds us, there are no ordinary people. We have never talked to mere mortals. The hope is that while we listen to these stories, you and I will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. Today it's my joy to introduce you to Nancy Curry. Nancy's going to share with us how she was born in Kansas, spent some time living in Iowa, and found her way to Springfield to invest a life in a good and beautiful place in a community, both at Missouri State and at Schweitzer Church. So join me in welcoming Nancy Curry. Well, today we're happy to welcome Nancy Curry to hear about her very interesting life. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you, Jason.
Why don't we start with hearing a bit of a biography about your life?
Okay, I was one of three children. My dad was a miller. My mother taught school, but then as she started having children, she felt like she needed to be a mother, and I was glad that she was. And we were not people of means. Most would have deemed us as poor. We lived on the north side of my hometown where all the poor people lived, but we really had a supportive, loving group on that side of town. And my dad continued to work as a miller until they sold the mill, and he had a chance to go with the company to Eudora, Kansas. But my next brother, Jim, was in football and track and at our high school, and he was a sophomore, and they just didn't want to pull him out of that and put him in a new situation. I was thrilled to death. I was still in elementary school. I didn't want to move any place. So they made a decision. Dad terminated himself from that job and went to work for the government munitions plant in El Dorado, Kansas. It was about 35-minute drive from my hometown, and he worked there until they closed that down. And at that time, he wanted to continue working some, applied for the Ottawa school districts, and was hired as a custodian at one of the elementary schools. He loved it. They loved him. The teachers loved him because he could fix anything. And if they needed something fixed, they'd call Mr. Curry. But he retired from there, and he worked, I think, until he was about 70 because he liked it so much. I retired at 56, but I liked what I was doing, but I had that opportunity at the university. They would pay tenured professors their full salary in retirement if they would take early retirement, because they could hire 2 incoming people for what they paid me. And I thought that was a pretty good deal, so I retired at 52. And that was wonderful. I mean, I don't have trouble keeping busy. I continued to teach here. I teach an adult class at Schweitzer, and we range in ages from 48, 45 to 95. So we have a broad spectrum. It's a wonderful class. We study the Bible, and they are eager to learn. I hand out questions every week, and I said, "Are you guys getting tired of me handing these questions out?" Because it was a lot of work to type them up. And they said, no, we really need those. I said, okay. I thought I'll continue to do that. But it's a very supportive and prayerful group, and I feel blessed to be their teacher. I'm the one that's reaping all the benefits from that experience. as far as my religious preparation, my mother, the church I grew up in, had a cradle roll. And as soon as children were born, you were taken to the church, and the newborn was put on the cradle roll. And you were taken there my mother took me every Sunday. They had people in the cradle roll room to take care of the infants. And I literally grew up in that church from the time I was an infant until I went away to college at the age of 18. And it's very close to my heart. There are three of us who grew up in that church together that are close enough that we can get together. Larry Arnold, he lives in Lebanon, and Fred Craig, who lived in Topeka, but he moved to Wichita. He's a retired Methodist minister. And about 3 weeks after he moved there, he was offered a church back in Topeka that he had preached at for 18 years. They wanted him to come back, and he retired from there. And so he called me, said, Nancy, he told me a situation. He said, I wish they'd have said this 3 weeks ago. I've already moved into Wichita. And he said, I guess I'll just drive back and forth. And I said, Fred, that's an hour-and-a-half drive there and going home every Sunday. And if you have meetings, yeah, he wasn't sure what he was going to do. And I said, you maybe need to rent a room up there or something like that. And he said, yeah, I got to think this out, because he loves to preach and he's very good at it. I've encouraged him all of his life because he's very good at it. But I haven't talked to him in a week or two, so I don't know if he's still journeying back and forth or if he's made arrangements up there. But he's a good man, and Larry is too. Larry was a scientist and worked to develop rocket fuel, and he was in the early stages of that. And he was a brain. I mean, a brainiac is a name for him. Quiet, good man, and very devout. But the three of us grew up in the MYF together. The rest are scattered everywhere. But it was a wonderful education. We had two sisters, older sisters in our church, who offered to take the MYF when they started it. And those gals were good Christians, and they were close enough to our age that they related well. So we were in that from the time we were, I think, sixth grade until high school. And the three of us keep in touch. We have a conference call periodically to see how everybody's doing. Fred and I get together often. Larry's wife is infirm to the place that he cannot leave her and will not leave her. And he has a daughter in Lebanon, and I'm sure she would stay, but he just, bless his heart, he's devoted, and you can't criticize that kind of devotion. Anyway, I went away to college, got a teaching degree, always knew I wanted to teach. I started teaching at the age of 10. I was assisting with a fifth grade Bible school class. I was in it, but the teacher was pregnant, and they said, they talked to my mother and said, she's going to need some help in there. Do you think Nancy could do that? And Mother said, well, I'm sure she would. I don't know that she'd want to. That's something you need to talk to her about. And they asked me, and I said, well, sure, I'll give it a try. And so that's when I started teaching. And every summer I was put into some situation, and then they started giving me my own classes. So I continued to do that. I also had a summer job with the Recreation Commission. I taught swimming in there, and I lifeguarded. And then they asked me if I would manage the program, and I said, sure. I did that, still worked at Bible school, and it was a busy summer, but I liked it. And that was pretty much it. When I went to college, I majored in science and elementary education. And I had 1 year in that and decided I'm not going to teach elementary children. You have to talk to them all the time and hold their hand and carry them around. And I thought, I need to teach people that I can talk with and not just to. So I switched to secondary education, biology, and physical education. And a teaching degree. And those are the things I graduated with. I taught a year in public school, got an assistantship offered to me for master's, and I thought about it, and I talked to my parents, and Mother said, "You've been in school all these years, you need to get out of there." And my dad said, "You need to do what you want." And so I kind of went along with him, and I decided to get the degree, went into high school teaching for a year, and then was offered a teaching position where I had done my master's program. And so I took that. I stayed there 2 years and was offered a job at Iowa State. Went up there, spent 3 years, and I loved the people. I loved the school. But Jason, you know this, living in Michigan, how hard their winters are.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'd die up there. I bought heavy coats and I wore wool socks all the time. It was just miserable. And if I had a meeting at night, I would take my lunch and my dinner in a bag so I wouldn't have to go outside. And at that time, I drove a convertible, Carnegie convertible, and the snows were so bad. I had a meeting. I got out of there at 8 o'clock at night, and my car was covered with snow. It was covered. It was just a bump, and everybody's in the parking lot was pretty much. And I cleaned that off, and I thought, what's wrong with this picture? So I resigned in February, and my boss said, "I thought you liked us." And I said, "I love you. I love the people, but I can't stand the thought of going through another winter up here." She said, "Nancy, this is no different than where you grew up." And I said, "Oh, yes, it is. I lived there for 18 years, and this is a lot different." And so I left. I resigned. I didn't have a teaching position, but one of my professors in graduate school was at Chico State in California, and Wayne McKinney, one of his students, had just taken the department head position at Missouri State. And I just got out of the shower one day getting ready to go to work, and the phone rang, and it was Wayne McKinney from California. And he said, "Dr. Pease has told me about you and that you're interested in coming south." And I said, "Oh, God bless you, I sure am." And he said he was going to be the department head. He had been there 1 year, and he would like me to come down and see about coming there. And I said, "That's what, about 500 miles south of here?" He said, "Pretty close, maybe 478. I said, "That'd be warmer, wouldn't it?" He said, "Yeah." So I went down there. The people were great here. The students were great. I walked in there on a Sunday. My appointment was 8 o'clock Monday, and I went to the campus union at night, went over and visited with the students, asked them how they liked the university, what their majors were. I found some physical education majors, and I visited with them. I said, "How do you like your department?" "Oh, we love it. We've got great teachers." And I said, "Well, that's a wonderful recommendation." I said, "How about your department head?" "He's a nice guy. He makes us work hard, but he's a nice guy." And I said, "There's nothing wrong with that." And they said, "No." So the next morning I went in for my interview, and the department head took me from classroom to introduce me to the faculty. And several kids in each room said, "We met her at the campus union last night. She was asking about the program." And my boss said, "What were you doing over there?" And I said, "Finding out what the kids had to say about the department and about the teaching staff." He said, "Really, we've never had anybody come in here like that." And I said, "Well, you'll be happy to know you've gotten very high ratings from your majors." And I said, "That's worth a lot." And he said, "Well, okay." So I decided after that one day there that I would take the position. And he said, Nancy, I want to take you out to dinner and talk to you. And I said, that's great. And I said, I would like to come here. But I said, I've got to terminate my position at Iowa State. And I was in the running for a position at Southwest Texas State in San Marcos. And I said, I'm one of the finalists there, and there are 3 of us. And I've got to withdraw from that immediately. I can't leave them, in the lurch. So I said, I will call them first thing in the morning and withdraw. And I said, and I'll make all the other arrangements I need to make. You'll need a copy of my transcript and all of that stuff, and I'll get that sent to you. He said, okay, what can we do to help? And I said, at this point, nothing except find me a place to live. And he said, we can do that. And so he found me an apartment in the basement of the head of the education department. Really good man. His wife was a lovely lady. And so I lived there for a year, and I thought I need to get my own place. And so I rented an apartment in a large old homes in Ames, Iowa. They have beautiful old homes, and people break them up into little apartments. So I moved out of that and stayed in this one for 2 more years. And then by that time, the winter cold was just really eating on me because, they had cold weather from October to April 1st. April 1st, my last year there, we got 6 inches of snow. And I thought, I got to get out of here. But I had already resigned and had everything pretty much in order. So I came to Springfield. I'd been here for an interview, and I'd looked at some places to live. And Wayne said, how would you like to live in somebody's home? And I said, I'd really rather live alone. I'd rather have an apartment of my own. And he said, okay, we can take care of that. So I got an apartment here, loved it. And he said, we'll want you to be in town by August 1st, ready to go. And I said, I can do that. But I'm teaching summer school at Iowa State this summer. I have committed to that, and I have to finish that. He said, when does that end? And I said, July 31st. But I will be here as soon as I can. And my brother, God love him, came to Ames. I got a moving van, and the guys came in, moved everything down there before I left. And I had arranged to put it in a storage facility till I found an apartment. And they were still hunting for one here for me, and they found one, and I liked it, so I had them deliver my stuff. But I came, you walk into a place and you're a good fit for it. That's what the experience I had in that department and at the college union that night, talking to the kids. I thought, this is a good place to be. So am I supposed to be watching that? Okay. So I came here, and that has been 50 years ago. This year, I figured that up, and I taught until I was 50, and the university offered anybody who was fully tenured professor, they could retire at their full pay, and it would stick through retirement because they had a lot of young people coming in, and they needed teaching spots for them, and they were good people. Well, and I thought about that, and I thought, that's not a bad deal. So I went ahead and retired at 50, and I never looked back. I mean, I still am involved in university things, and I go to the reception, retirement, and stuff that goes on over there. But my time is my own, and that's a blessing. So I've done that, and I got more involved in the church and have enjoyed that. And that's kind of what I do.
That is what you do.
Yeah.
And I have so enjoyed this, listening to you talk about your story and where you've been. I did not know that you were in Ames.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 long cold winters. Being from Michigan, that doesn't bother you, but boy, being from a flat land, and we had cold winters, but gosh, never that much or that long.
Well, you mentioned your mom and dad several different times and their influence on you, and I wondered if you, looking back, thinking about all the things that they taught you, if you can highlight 2 or 3 things that you think your parents really wanted to endow you with, give
Absolutely.
you with.
My dad didn't like to have us argue. And he said, now, let's not go there. Let's sit and talk this through. And we did. And I've learned that from him, that not to be argumentative or always challenging, but to kind of work through things. And I use that a lot in my teaching, especially in my philosophy classes. We get in discussions, and some of the students would get so angry because of their position, and they wanted everybody else to believe. And for example, in one of my philosophy classes, somebody brought up abortion. And boy, that was like they lit a firecracker. And we had kids that believed it was okay, kids that said, no, it's murder. And that discussion I had planned only for 2 days that week in that topic. And we ended up spending 4 days. And I don't think we changed anybody's mind, but at least everybody spoke to the point where they sort of understood this man's view or this lady's view. And I think they were more accepting of all of it. But that was the one trigger thing that just went out of my mind. I never thought it would be that explosive. So my dad, I would think back to my dad, and he'd say, now. And this incident just happened this year in my Sunday school class. I have always made it a rule not to talk politics. I said, there's no place for that in the church. And I said, I'll talk politics with you anytime, but not in this class. Well, we were talking about things that were detrimental to society. And it went along with our teaching and scripture. And one of the men in there said, you want something detrimental to our society, Donald Trump. And I said, whoa, let's hold it there. Well, one lady got so angry, she stood up and she said, we're not supposed to talk politics in this class. You said that. And I said, one word has been said and it won't be spoken again, will it, Tom? And he said, no. And she said, I'm leaving. And I said, now you need to think about giving us another chance. And I said, if you want to quit the class, that's your prerogative, but I'd like you to think it over. Well, she sat through class and I could see her fists getting tighter and tighter. And I thought that was not a good thing for me to do. After class, she left, just stormed out. And everybody came to me and said, has she left us for good? And I said, I don't know. She's the only one that knows the answer to that. And she may not know it right now. So the next Sunday, she was not there. And so I called her and asked her how she was doing. She said, I'm doing fine, but I'll never come back to that class. And I said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I hope you can find another class that you can enjoy. And she said, I'm looking for one. And I said, good. And I said, please don't hold any bad feelings for those of us that were in there and for the gentleman that made that comment. You have to realize that he is 75 years old and he doesn't always think through everything. And I said, I understand that because I've known him for so long. And she said, well, he spoke politics. And I said, you know, Kathy, he said one word. And I said, it was like somebody lit a stick of dynamite under you. She said, I know it. I just hate for people to talk about Trump in a negative way. And I said, I understand that. I understand that. And I understand your right to say that. But I'm sorry this has arrived at this level. and I hope you find a class that you will enjoy. And so she did go to another class, and I forget, it was Women at the Well, or you probably know about that. I don't know anything about those. All I know about is my own class. And people said, is she leaving over that? And I said, it appears so. And they said, I can't believe that. And I said, I don't know. I said, some people in their beliefs, you say a word and they just are off. And I said, that's unfortunate. But anyway, that's it. My mother I was always interested with two older brothers who teased their kid sister unmercifully. She said, Nancy, don't let them get to you. And I said, Mom, you don't know how it is. It's rough being a kid with two older brothers who just like to tease all the time. She said, you know, they love you. And I said, sometimes it's hard for me to hold on to that. But Jim was closest to me in age, and we were close all the time until he passed away. My older brother left college and eloped. None of us liked his girlfriend much, but you know, when they're married, that's it. You just accept them. And mother did a marvelous job trying to make her feel included and loved and all that. But I think she was kind of evil in a way, you know. She had some really mean things that she did, but her kids turned out well for the most part. And one of her sons and I are very close, but I was always sticking up for him when she got on him. And I mean, he calls me every day, checks on me, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm doing good. And he called me this morning. He said, now, I wasn't going to call you this morning because I got this guy coming out to fix my hot tub. And he said, I got to see Dr. Ben. And I said, don't worry about it, Steve. I'll check in with you this afternoon when I get home. He said, okay. So, and he's a love, and his family, they're just good kids. But anyway, that was growing up. And did you have a little sister?
I did. 6 years younger than me.
Okay, I was that with my brother Jim. Did you tease her?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
She probably had similar conversations with our mom.
Yeah. And, you know, it wasn't that I didn't love them, but they just teased me, I thought, unmercifully. And I look back and I think some of the things were really funny in retrospect. But at the time, you know, when you're 7 or 8 or 9, it gets old in a hurry. But I wouldn't have changed it for the world. No. I really wouldn't have.
Thinking about, you know, like the totality of your life. Sometimes you can think about certain moments when, and obviously you've talked to it, like when you moved from Ames down to Missouri State. That was a turning point moment. And other things. What are some other moments that have been turning point moments in your life where you're like, I'm becoming, you know, like you're becoming the person you are now? I
think when I completed my PhD and returned to campus, and everybody started calling me Dr. Curry. I thought, now how do they know about that? And of course, you know, the grapevine in departments. And I'm sure they were told that Dr. Curry will be returning. I've been on leave. And that it drew me up. It made me stop and think, wow. And I thought, I really have gotten here. And I'm glad, I'm happy, I'm proud. But Lord, don't let me tarnish this in any way. Don't let me mess this up. And I felt that was an important, it's amazing. I think, I witnessed this, that when you have a doctor in front of your name, you're treated differently. Off campus or on, and even to this day, when I go to the dentist, I'll say, hi guys, I've been going there 50 years. And they said, hi, how's Dr. Curry today? And I said, well, I'm doing okay. I'm hoping my teeth are doing the same, or something like that. But they're just, I don't know. I found that to be true, that you're treated differently if you have a doctor in front of your name. I never have introduced myself as Dr. Curry. I just say, hi, I'm Nancy Curry. It's nice to meet you. And, but people change a little bit. And I don't want them to feel different about me. My mother taught me patience more so than my father, and that it was better to love somebody than to be angry at them. And, we had a neighborhood gang in the days before it didn't have a bad connotation like gangs did today. We played at night down under the street light. We'd play hide and seek or punch the icebox. Did you play? Those are way in the past. I've decided when I talk about punch the icebox, I said, what is that? And I said, it was a game. We played it until that when the street lights went off, they didn't go off, but when some time thing in my mother's head went off and said, it's time for these kids to go home. So she'd come out on the front porch and say, Nancy. And if I didn't say, yeah, she'd say, Nancy Lou. And I said, yeah, I'm. And I thought, she said, it's time to come home. And I said, could we have just another 30 minutes? No, you come home. And your friends need to go home too. And so I went home, and a lot of them went home. But that was just the way it was. And she told us anytime we were invited to a party at neighborhood kids' house, birthday parties, how you do that in elementary school. Before I left the front house, the front door, she'd look at me straight in the eye. You mind your manners. You say thank you. And you're very pleasant to the host. And before you leave, you'd go and say, thank you for having us. It was a lot of fun. And I said, okay. So I always did that. And one of my friends who lived up the street and walked there with, she said, why do you say that every time we leave? And I said, because my mother told me to. She said, oh, and that was it. I mean, that's just what we did. But anyway, it was good. We had a good group of kids in the neighborhood, and, it was great. Winters were long because when it was bitter cold, we didn't get outside much. We'd come in and play board games, but, you get 9 or 10 kids in there trying to play 3 or 4 board games. It gets kind of crazy. And my mother, after about 3 sessions of that, she called me aside. She said, do you get to go to anybody else's house? And I said, not yet. And she said, okay, I'm just checking. And I knew what was on her mind. And I said, do you want me to stop having the kids come? She said, oh, no, I wouldn't do that for the world. So anyway, that was growing up in the winter. It was not much fun, but it was a good place. Mm-hmm. The town was divided by a river, the Méridazine, River of Swans. That's in French, Méridazine. And the explorers named it when they came west, and they saw these beautiful white swans on that river. So they named it the Méridazine. And it had been that name over 150 years when I was in high school. So I never saw a white swan on that river my whole life, but there evidently were a lot. And the river ran through the center of the town, and the north side and the south side. The north side, people said, those kids up there are kind of rugrats. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, where do you live? And I said, I live on the north side. Oh, well, it doesn't mean anything. So I went home and asked my mom, and I said, what does that mean? She said, honey, I don't know, and it doesn't sound like we need to know. So I just didn't think about it. But it was a good place to grow up. When I go to my high school reunion, and I try to go every time, we don't have many of us alive. There, I think, are 20 out of our class that are still alive. There were 110 of us that graduated. But we sit and we talk about it was really a good place to grow up. We were fortunate with that, and we realized it. I realized it all along. It was a good place, but they said, it really was a good place. But my mother did not work outside the home until I got in junior high. And we had a little dairy bar about a block and a half from my house where they sold fresh milk, and they also had a place where they canned it and did all that there. And they kept after. Mother bought our milk and butter, and we had chickens, so we had our own eggs. But they kept asking her, Lois, would you like a little part-time job? And she said, not as long as my children are in elementary school. She said, I want to be available if they need me. Well, they found out I made it to 7th grade, and they asked her, and she said, would it bother you if I went to work up there? And I said, I don't think so. I said, I think you ought to do it. They've been trying to get you to do it for years. And so she started to work up there, and she could walk to work. And I'd get off we had a city bus that the kids on the north side had to ride. It cost us $0.05 a day. And so I'd get off up there on the corner by the Dairy Queen where she worked, or the dairy store, and I'd go and get a free ice cream cone every night. So it had benefits, but it was a good town. Our church was on the north side of town, and I asked Mother how we got to that church. She said, when your dad and I moved here, we went to the Methodist church and we went to the Baptist church, and the Methodist church seemed much friendlier. So we joined there. And so that was good enough rationale for me. And so my brothers and I were all in that church. And so it was a good thing.
Yeah. You've you've taken us to a number of places in your memory and your story. I wonder, what are some things you're thinking about or dreaming about in the future?
I read about people and their dreams for the future. I see a film or a TV show where they're planning for their future, and several times I think about that. I think, well, I'm 82 years old. I've lived longer than my parents. I've lived longer than both brothers. And I don't know, as far as a future, I'd like to remain healthy and exercise, and I'd like to continue teaching as long as I can make sense with it. If I start losing my touch with things, I hope I'll be wise enough to step back. I'd like to continue teaching. I'd like to keep close to my family, and I do pretty good at that. I don't have much future plans at 82. I don't know the need for them. Really, I've lived longer than I thought I would. I told my physician, and he's retired. We were talking one day, and he said, well, you're really healthy. You'll live a long time. And I said, well, both my parents died at 78, so I figured I'd probably check out then. He said, oh, Nancy, that has nothing to do with it. I said, well, that's encouraging. I won't plan on being done living at 78. But anyway, I'd like to keep doing what I'm doing. I'd like to do some more traveling. But we had a motorhome, and I loved that. But I felt like I know what the characteristics of aging are on motor skills. And so I decided that I probably didn't need to be driving this 10,000-pound vehicle at 77, and I thought it would probably, in wisdom, this was strictly a wisdom decision. And I talked to Marilyn about it. She said, I think you're right. And I thought, okay, so we sold it. Gosh, we advertised it. It was gone in 3 days. And I think many times we probably were premature in that decision, because I wish we had it. You can just put your dog and your cats in there and take off, and you have everything you need. But we don't need to be doing that at our age. But as far as I'd like to keep on keeping on, that'd be my best dream for the future, keep on keeping on.
All right.
Okay.
I think I could listen to you for hours.
Oh, gosh. No, you couldn't. I couldn't talk for hours.
There's one final question I'd like to ask.
Okay.
What's a final word or a piece of sage advice you'd like to leave with us?
Keep close to the Lord in all that you do, and don't be afraid to share that belief with others. That's about as sagey as I can be. I always, I always told my students that, if you're right with God and your spiritual life is in place, you've got it made. You've got it made. You just need to work with that plan and keep close to the Lord. He's not going to steer you wrong. And I said, I don't make decisions quickly. I never have. I like to think about them and pray about them, and I would often consult my parents for their input, but I wouldn't necessarily take it. But they seemed to be so happy that I would ask them. And so I said, don't be afraid to ask those you love what they think's best for you. Mm-hmm. And that's probably my sage advice. Not too sagey, but
really good. Really okay. Good. Thank you, Nancy.
I appreciate the opportunity to share with you, Jason. And if you need anything else I can help you with, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and a big thank you to Nancy for sharing her story. I hope that in listening to Nancy, you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold and listen to the really cool people around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is the executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. Until next time, you can help us out by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast.